Did you know that until as recently as 1998, the origin of the Shiraz grape has been shrouded in mystery? There really were some rather fantastical myths and legends that all seemed quite plausible at the time. For starters, there was the great beautiful city of Shiraz, once Persian, now Iranian, which has a winemaking history that is almost 5,000 years old. In fact, there was once a famed French diamond merchant who paid a visit to the town of Shiraz and waxed lyrical about the glorious wines of Shiraz. Now, back in France, in the Rhone Valley, which is where Syrah is king, local folklore says that the very wine industry of Hermitage in the Rhone was founded on the vines that had been brought back from Persia by the famed knight Gaspard de Sterenburg. So we put those two bits of information together, and it seems really plausible that in fact Syrah could be little more than a French linguistic corruption of the word Shiraz. Certainly James Busby, who was the first man to bring Syrah vines from France to Australia, was well aware of the supposed Persian origins of the grape. That is presumably why in Australia the grape Syrah ended up being called Shiraz. Possibly also because apparently the wines of Persia were quite hip and happening at the time. Of course, the Italians got in on the act and denied all of the above and said, no, it's very obvious that Syrah is named after Syracuse, the town in Sicily. But then in 1998, DNA profiling came along and ruined everybody's fun. But more than 25 years later, that little bit of hard scientific data has not stopped many winemakers from happily spreading the romance of Syrah's imaginary Persian roots. Now, the reason that we're talking about Syrah today is because today's hand drink solo wine of the day is the Smiley non-vintage red blend made under the banner of Terracura wines, vinified by winemaker Chris Groenewald. Ever since its inception in 2013, Terracura has been an enormously exciting brand that has been right at the forefront of the most avant-garde wines to be coming out of South Africa. In fact, slightly embarrassingly perhaps, the wine brand was initially called Avant-Garde Wines, but mercifully that didn't last very long. Terracura was founded by wine lover Michael Roots, who was not a winemaker himself, but he had been inspired by these incredible wild and woolly genre-defying wines that had been coming out of the Swartland during the Swartland Revolution in the first decade of this millennium. So in Terracura's first vintage, Michael enlisted the consulting help of winemaker Andre Mullineaux from Mullineaux Wines. And then in the second vintage in 2014, he then brought on winemaking couple Ryan Mostert and Samantha Suddens as full-time winemaker for Terracura Wines. Ryan and Samantha at the time were working at Reinecker Wines in Stellenbosch, but they'd always felt much more comfortable amongst the bearded, barefooted winemakers of the Swartland, and so they threw their lot in with Terracura and really embraced the community that was then the Swartland independent producers, which would include a long list of names that we would today quite justifiably call the big guns. This list includes people like Eben Sadi, Adi Badenhorst, Andrea Mullineaux, Yolandi Fouché from Wolf and Woman Wines, David and Nadia, Donovan Roll, Craig Horgans from Testelonga, and obviously Cully Lowe from Porcelainberg. Then fast forward 6 years and COVID is wreaking havoc with the South African wine industry in 2020. Ryan Mostert emigrates to the UK. Samantha Suddens launches her own wine brand called Vine Venom, which is supremely exciting, and we can talk more about that for hours. It really is a brilliant range of wines. This of course left Terracura as a brand languishing a little with no one to steer it, but Michael Roots did not give up hope. He firmly believed in the brand of Terracura, which by the way means care for the earth. So he eventually managed to wrangle maverick winemaker Chris Groenewald into taking over the brand of Terracura as equal partner with Michael. And so there really is new life in this brand, which to be honest is kind of essential drinking for any wine history scholar that wants to be in touch or experience the kind of wildness that was coming out of the Swartland Revolution 20 years ago. Controversially, I would say that while many of the big guns that we've just listed have kind of gone straight-laced, Terracura, under the winemaking of Chris Groenewald, and Vine Venom, with the winemaking of Samantha Suddens, are probably the last two brands that have really managed to hang on to that wild, otherworldly, multi-vintage, floor-matured, crazy winemaking that inspired all the cool kids in the first place. But being cool is not the same as being delicious. So we really need to get into the glass to see what awaits us. Now, when we give this guy a sniff, well, we get a really rather deliciously generous, open, but also rustic Vanguard. There's plenty of fruit, blackberries and cherries, and there's also a lovely little floral hint. But then over and above that, there's cinnamon, fresh earth, aniseed, a touch of nutmeg. And I guess this makes sense because the wine is really almost 2/3 Syrah, which can give you florals and blackberries. And then it's backed up by Cinsault and Touriga National, both of which can also give you florals. And then there's also Tannat, and Touriga National and Tannat can both give you elements of licorice or aniseed, especially in the riper styles. So you can see quite clearly where the components work together in order to deliver what we smelt on the Vanguard. But let's give it a sip and see what it's like. Well, for a supposedly rustic wild wine, it really is supremely drinkable. That blackberry fruit at the core is beautifully poised. It manages to be fresh and bright, but still generous. And perhaps part of the drinkability comes from the fact that at least 1/3 of the wine is from the 2021 vintage, so already 3 years old at the time of tasting. And so everything is just a little softer on the palate than it would perhaps be if the wine were entirely a 2023 vintage wine. Finally, around the edges of the wine, kind of wrapped around that core of blackberry fruit and touches of spice, there are some really beautiful, tart, much fresher elements of red cherry and even goji berry, which is fascinating. So that's all we have time for today, but if you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon so that we can make more of these sorts of videos, and subscribe to the Hand Drink Solo YouTube channel, where we publish at least 6 videos each month, and we talk about things like wine science, wine history, unusual winemaking styles, unusual cultivars, and some of the dynamic rising winemaking stars that are coming out of the South African wine.